My name is Jake, and ever since I was a kid, Halloween had been my favorite time of year. It wasn't just the candy or the costumes that excited me, it was the thrill of the unknown. The feeling that, for one night, something dark and mysterious hovered just out of sight. This year, though, my friends and I were done with trick-or-treating. We wanted something scarier, something real. Everyone in town knew about the old farmhouse at the edge of the woods. Abandoned for decades, it had a reputation for being haunted. Rumors swirled about the previous owners vanishing without a trace, strange lights flickering in the windows at night, and a whispering voice that called out to anyone who wandered too close. Naturally, we decided that on Halloween night, we'd go and see it for ourselves. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds when we set out, our flashlights casting pale beams across the empty fields. The air was cool, the chill deepening with every step toward the house. As we reached the sagging porch, the boards groaned under our weight, and an unsettling silence settled around us. It felt as though we had stepped out of our world and into someplace else. The front door creaked open with a push, and we slipped inside. The air smelled stale and cold, like wet earth and decay. Cobwebs hung in thick curtains, and dust coated every surface. As we wandered through the rooms, our nervous chatter echoed unnaturally. It wasn't long before I noticed that the deeper we went, the more off everything felt, like the walls were closing in, and the darkness itself was watching us. When we reached the living room, we saw it. A massive, faded pentagram carved into the wooden floorboards. At the center of it lay an old, cracked mirror. A shiver ran down my spine as I shined my flashlight over the symbols scrawled around it. Just as I turned to point it out, the front door slammed shut with a thunderous bang, plunging us into darkness. "Jake, come here," a voice whispered, low and hushed, like breath against my ear. I froze. It was unmistakably my name, spoken in a voice I didn't recognize. The others turned their flashlights toward me, but the beams struggled to pierce the shadows, which seemed to move and pulse as though they were alive. Suddenly, my flashlight flickered, casting brief, disjointed glimpses of the mirror's surface. In the brief flashes of light, I saw something in the reflection. It wasn't us. It was a figure with hollow eyes and a wide, toothy grin, standing right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the darkness, deep and suffocating. The temperature dropped rapidly, and the whispering grew louder, now coming from all directions. The mirror's surface began to distort, stretching and warping like liquid. I felt a pull, like an invisible hand gripping me, dragging me closer to it. I stumbled back, but my feet wouldn't move. My friends grabbed my arms, trying to pull me away from the mirror. The whispers turned into frenzied chanting, and in the reflection I saw us, not as we were, but as something else. Pale, hollow, with eyes that had lost all spark of life. "Jake, you belong here," the voice said again, this time echoing inside my head. With a final burst of strength, I tore myself free and ran, not daring to look back. We burst through the front door and into the night, the house looming behind us like a blackened silhouette. The whispering faded, but the feeling of cold fingers on my skin lingered. The next day, we swore we wouldn't speak of what happened, but I couldn't shake the image of that mirror, or the whispers that still haunted my dreams. Even now, when I'm alone, I hear it, calling my name.
My name is Mike, and I've been with Sullivan Rods for over 10 years. It's a quiet place on the edge of town, surrounded by dark woods, where we make fishing rods from sunrise to sunset. For the longest time, it was just an ordinary job with creaky old machines and the dusty smell of wood and resin. But a few months ago, something changed. Mr. Sullivan, the owner, started getting secretive about these special orders. He only let a few trusted workers handle them, but I was curious. I kept seeing deliveries arrive late at night, wrapped in heavy black tarps, and every time they did, Mr. Sullivan would lock himself away in the factory's back room for hours. One evening, he asked me to help him with an urgent special order. We walked to the far end of the factory, to a section I didn't even know existed. The air grew colder as we went deeper, and the lights were dim and flickering. When he opened the door, the stench hit me. Iron, decay, and something rotten like old meat left out in the sun. Inside the room, I saw the rods. These weren't our usual lightweight models. They were thick, dark, and twisted in a way that made my skin crawl. The shafts were covered in black, leathery material, and when I touched one, I swear I felt something pulse beneath the surface, like a faint heartbeat. I looked closer and saw the surface was riddled with tiny holes, like pores. "What are these made of?" I asked, my voice trembling. Mr. Sullivan only smiled. "A new kind of material, stronger than anything else." After that, things got even stranger. Some of the workers complained about seeing things, a flicker of movement just beyond the machines, shadows slipping into the corners. At night, when I worked late, I'd hear it too, faint whispers coming from the storage room, like voices begging for help. But when I'd turn on the lights, the room was always empty. Then one of the night shift workers went missing. Mr. Sullivan claimed he'd quit without a word, but his locker was still full, his car left in the parking lot. That night, I snuck back into the factory. I had to know what was going on. I followed the whispers back to the special orders room. The metallic stench was overwhelming now, thick enough to taste. When I switched on the lights, the room was filled with rows of rods, all lined up like soldiers. Each rod was now pulsing, slowly expanding and contracting. I stumbled back, and that's when I saw it, a hand protruding from one of the rods as if it had been molded into the shaft. It twitched. Panicking, I turned to run, but stopped when I heard a voice, a faint, wet gurgle. It was Tom, the missing worker. His face, twisted in agony, was half embedded into the nearest rod, his eyes wide with terror. Before I could move, Mr. Sullivan stepped out of the shadows, holding one of the rods. "They need to be fed, Mike," he whispered. "The rods grow stronger with each life they consume." The rods started shifting toward me, dragging along the floor. I felt a cold, slimy tendril wrap around my ankle, pulling me closer as the whispers turned into screams.
My name is Ethan, and I'd always taken the late train home after work. It was usually quiet, with just a few other tired souls slouched in their seats. That night, it seemed no different. The train was moving slowly through the dark countryside, its rhythmic clattering almost soothing until it stopped. The lights flickered before going out completely, leaving the train in complete darkness. I waited for an announcement, but nothing came. The silence stretched, and I felt an uneasy chill. Then, from somewhere down the carriage, I heard a faint, scratching noise. It grew louder, moving closer. I turned on my phone's flashlight and aimed it down the aisle, revealing empty seats. But the scratching persisted, now accompanied by a low, raspy breathing. The air grew colder, and I noticed a fog creeping in under the train doors. Suddenly, the emergency lights flickered on, casting the carriage in an eerie red glow. The scratching stopped. I let out a breath of relief too soon. A figure emerged from the fog, walking towards me. It was dressed in an old-fashioned conductor's uniform, its face pale and gaunt, eyes hollow. "Ticket, please," it croaked, its voice dry and cracked. "I already showed my ticket," I replied, trying to sound confident. But the conductor kept approaching, its steps slow and deliberate. When it reached me, it reached out with a skeletal hand. I saw now that its uniform was torn and stained, the fabric decayed like it had been buried for decades. The conductor grabbed my wrist, its icy grip sending a shock through my arm. "Your stop is next," it whispered, as its eyes met mine. In that moment, I felt a pull, a tug at my very soul. The train lurched forward, but it wasn't on the tracks anymore. The world outside was gone, replaced by a swirling black void. The other passengers, who I thought were asleep, were now standing, their faces twisted and vacant, like mannequins. They moved towards me, their mouths opening wide as if to scream, but no sound came out. The fog thickened, swallowing the carriage whole. I woke up on the floor of an empty platform, the first rays of morning light filtering through the station windows. My phone lay beside me, dead. The train was gone, and the tracks were rusted and overgrown with weeds. I've taken that same route for years, but no one remembers the night train I described. There's no record of it ever running. Yet sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint clatter of wheels and a ghostly whisper, "Your stop is next."